Chapter 10. I'd rather own a little and see the world than own the world and see a little. Alexander Sattler. It was dodgy to drive my van with its loose shockies. That meant my seat felt like it was one of those fun, bouncy hydraulic ones. It was a 2,000 kilometre round trip, and it wasn't going to be good to my worn brake pads either. I should have, but didn't care. I needed to get out. I preferred to go by motorcycle, but a coin flip told me not to do that. There were some pretty heavy communities between here and Broome. I hated thinking like that, but I'm also a solo woman, so I have to. I made it to Halls Creek that evening. The infamous town that I'd heard was full of thieving on grey nomads. There was a huge, beautiful bush-style resort with a comm and a van park that really was at odds with all I'd heard about the place. As long as the caravanners stayed in here, they'd have no problems. I suspected that they tried to free camp when they got the thieving. Well, you get what you get. This was their town to free camp in, not for white tourists. I wandered into the huge bar to get myself a Bluefish. It was more like a workers' club with high-vis the required uniform. I was impressed that they also let locals drink in there. This made the place cheerful. I probably wouldn't have stayed till closing time, but, as I later heard from Matt, they make patrons do breath tests. Like the bottle-o grog limits, this should happen in every pub all over Australia. There'd be a huge outcry from the functioning alcoholic skippies who are every politician's preferred demographic. Anyway, enough about my plans to upgrade the country. Speaking of skips, it was intimidating to walk out on the veranda packed with males. Because the white high-vis were in the minority, the atmosphere was different. I actually heard a young fella talk about me and describe me as an angel. Not to me though, which was a relief. Wow, I'd never get that kind of lovely attention in a skip workers bar. Earshot comments would be rude, crude and unattractive, like the losers who uttered them. I guess that's what happens when you go out back. The shortage of females increases your number out of 10 by a few points. I went to a local servo over the huge bridge that was under construction the next morning when I left. This was the very bridge that had spelt my reroute from Exmouth to North Queensland to be nearly 10,000 kilometres out of my way when it had washed away in the parts. The servo was absolutely fine and friendly, with locals coming in and getting coffee shouted for them by other people in the coffee line who could afford them. I'd changed my hearsay opinion of Halls Creek. I'd definitely stay here on the way back. Beautiful Broome. What a place. Like the set of a movie. More like Asia than Australia. Except in Asia they've knocked all the old buildings down and replaced them with new ones. Some old industrial sheds sat among the new. Even the new were architecturally built to look like nicer versions of the old sheds and shops. And speaking of Asia, I met local community people who were definitely descended from the Malaysian and Japanese pearlers. I was parked up in a car park that was teeming with backpackers. A local guy with an elder who had a hard time getting out of the car were right near me. The younger fella, boomer age, was talking to a stack of cruise ship tourists. When he'd finished, he came and spoke to me like he knew me. I immediately saw that his ancestry was both Aboriginal and Asian. I was excited to see someone like me with partly Asian looks but very Aussie. The OG Aussie, if you will. He said that he'd been telling these tourists about the American actress that got taken by a croc. Again, he was telling me as if I knew. Please tell me. Apparently back in the 80s, an American model had unfortunately been taken by a croc in the nearby river. Although it was a tragic accident, and no wonder Americans thought Australian wildlife was dedicated to killing people, I was relieved it wasn't an ocean attack. I was yet to go to this famous Cable Beach. I had a big yarn with these guys and found out a bit about them. The elder had come in from Derby to pick up his wife off the plane and also to get his dialysis. Derby was a bit of a drive away, and it must have been hard to live like that as you got older. I'm sure he'd lived nowhere else but on his lands though. The other fella had done so much with his life. He'd been in a band in Weed Town back in the day. He would have been great entertainment to yarn with more, but I had to go find somewhere to free camp. I was really glad to be welcomed, of sorts, to the area by the OG owners. I asked them about free camping and they told me to go to a beach around by the port. "Don't let the boys steal your car," he called out to me as I drove off. Oh, great. Maybe I wouldn't camp at the beach he told me about. There was a night market on by this beach I was at, and as I drove around looking for scarce parks, I found a block of land for sale that everyone seemed to be parking up on. I did the same and figured I could just camp here the night and look like I had one too many drinks at the markets. It was a good little hack and I took note of it for future use, as the council won't fine you on private property, only the owner. And they seemed to be fine with everyone parking all over it. Probably some land banking Perth millionaire, so a victimless crime. The markets were lovely and artsy. This place has vibes of Darwin and Cairns, though a lot smaller. I bought the famous Staircase to the Moon photographic print that people flock to see. Australia's version of Santorini, except full moon. I visited the more likely version of Santorini when I journeyed over to Cable Beach on sunset. So many of us waiting to take pics, and of course it didn't do it justice. I was really surprised at the other half of Cable that had 4 drives all over it. I walked up to check out the camel convoys that wove their way along the eastern end of the beach and had to look out for maniacs nearly running me over. Fucking skips from Melbourne and Perth, my 2 least favourite bogan varieties, showing off their expensive 4-wheel drives. We can't have nice things in this country, I swear. I actually camped at a van park the next night. I'd had to line up in the morning outside and then was crammed in beside 2 other caravans, one of which had an aggressive blue cattle dog that growled at me as I went to put my extension lead in the box nearby them. I was sick of people apologising for their shitty van park etiquette, so I simply said, "That's not cool." The woman didn't say much. When I saw her partner, I could see why this dog was aggressive. I took off that night to go to a pub and see a band. It was such a good vibe of a place with heaps of locals there. The band was cranking and played some old 80s songs by Indigenous bands that I loved. I sat at a table with Fijian resort workers who were a really good time. The most verbose guy who invited me to sit with them was talking about going back to his quarters. After chatting away about finding free camps, he said that I could camp in his van park, car park. He'd seen others do this. I offered to give him a lift. I suddenly saw all the others at the table go a bit quiet. I didn't really know what the deal was. I worked it out later. I thought he was just going to show me where to park and I would come back another night. Instead, after I dropped him and left, he kept texting and calling me. I ignored the calls because I realised he thought we were going to have sexy time. The others would have been dark because they either shared a room with him and couldn't go home till he was finished, or he was married and they knew his wife, or likely both. Bit of a breakdown in communications there. I didn't want to go there with him in case he was married. And he was massive, not fat, just huge from being an ex-rugby player. I couldn't handle a guy who was both tall and built. It didn't fill me with safe vibes. I visited nice beaches and museums and generally hung around town, checking out food from all different cultures. Naturally, I spent a day at the beach swimming in the cold water, then hiding my skin from the sun in a very hot little tent I'd put up on the beach and did my best to hold down against the breeze. It was worth the effort. At one stage there, a lifesaver on a quad bike, like Baywatch, except he didn't look like them, rolled up and asked everyone to get out of the water. At Cable, there was the ever-present sight of helicopters patrolling the coastline. Very expensive safety measure, and I figured if you were here in the quieter wet season, they wouldn't bother. You swam at your own risk. I walked up to the lifesaver and said, "Shark, croc, or stingers? Cable is a dangerous place." He replied, "Shark," which I was relieved about. I'd love to see a croc roll up on the beach, but not on my swimming day. Maybe at sunset or something. Nights were lonely because I had to squirrel myself away in the back of the van to avoid detection. I even managed to camp at Cable Beach, which I was proud of. I love getting away with free camping, and I could now tick that off my list of expensive places to camp. Byron Bay was number 1 with a fine of over $2,000. Then Cottesloe Beach, where I parked among some wedding goers and were among the vehicles that were left because people drank too much. I even cook my dinner in my van over my little butane cooker, which is a bit risky. I got busted in Cairns at the beautiful beaches between there and Port Douglas. No fine though, just a warning, so I can count that as a win too. And now Cable Beach. What's the point of edgy free camping if you can't live openly and relax? The bath and the ocean in the morning is one of the points. One other is proving that my tradie looking van is working. I sacrificed a lot of comfort by living this camping style in this van. No sink and cooker inside to stand up and prepare food at. No bed raised off the floor to feel like you're in a real bedroom. A motorcycle taking up the bulk of space, so effectively I was in a freight van. Because of this, I got to stay at the beautiful suburbs that only people who can afford them get to experience. All of us can experience them if we're sneaky enough. The car park of the beach was taken over by a majority of what seemed to be South American backpackers. I didn't camp there, too obvious. I spoke to them though, with free camping being my convo starter. I needn't have bothered though, they seemed to like the look of me and accept me on sight. I should have stayed with them and learned their ways. There were some women among them though who were looking at me with suspicion. So their men were sluts and I'd be the one getting the blame. A good reason to only chat with them for camping advice. I seemed to know all the spots by now, so I toddled off. Because there was a fair bit of talent in town, I decided to search up Tinder. Instead of a backpacker, I got a male nurse who had real accommodation. He was in his late 20s, also Kenyan heritage like Felix, and hailed from Adelaide. So we'd done his schooling in Australia since his accent was pure Aussie. And like boys who've been here for a while, they have that Aussie male chewed. Or it was just more manosphere influence making hookups unpleasant. Anyway, he was easy to deal with at first. I picked him up in Cable Beach where he lived. He walked to the beachfront though, not wanting me to see where he lived, probably. He insisted we drive around a bit at first. Good to see males have some self-preservation actions. I could be a nut job. We chatted really easily. When he said he was OG Kenyan, he asked me if I knew where that was. I said I could even point to it on a map of Africa. We laughed at the fact that he had to explain to some folks where it was. Welcome to backwoods Australia. Something he said which I didn't appreciate was telling me about his friend who got a girl pregnant and claimed she was trying to trap him. Come on man, your friend could have used a condom. If he didn't trust her enough to do birth control, that's on him, not her. Women will use a man's uncontrolled desire to do all sorts of things. Sort out your aversion to condoms first, and it'll never happen. I'd been with men who absolutely insisted on condoms despite us seeing each other for a few months. They were from African nations and not brought up in Australia. They knew the risks and took precautions, even though HIV isn't that common in Oz. These careless boys could learn from them. I didn't say my piece though. I was still in tuning mode. And it turned out it didn't work, or his attitude got in the way, or my reticence about him showed through. We pulled up outside his place and he said that he couldn't do anything tonight because he had work in the morning. I was kind of relieved. It was nice to do a preliminary interview. I thought I was interviewing him and he'd passed. He leaned forward and I hugged him. He impatiently said, "I thought we were going to make out." I replied, "Well, that's up to you, isn't it?" So we made out. There was a fridge on the seat between us, so it was tricky. Somehow though, he managed to reach over and down and grab my ass as we were kissing. He made some kind of groaning noise. Then he was off, saying he'd ring me tomorrow night. Like I said, I thought I was interviewing him, but he was interviewing me. I suspected that the table seemed to be turning with these loose, slutty men who showed up and just expected sex. I returned to Cable Beach that evening, expecting a message on Tinder to go pick him up at his place. I got nothing. I even messaged him, which made me a bit disappointed in myself. I figured that it was my seemingly non-keenness to make out. He was really uptight also, all sorts of hang-ups about things that I didn't expect. I'm sure he was sus on me and thought I was homeless and using him for accommodation for the night. Well, he was right, but he'd get his payment. But crying out loud, I'm so sick of these jerks. I'm sure a million incels would cheer at me getting rejected. It's not that he didn't want to have sex with me, because I'm absolutely sure he did. It's the fact that he was worried that I'm a risk, when it's really the opposite. Every male on Tinder poses a risk to the women who use that app. The majority of them don't appreciate that. When I took him out, I suppose he thought I'd just fuck him in the back of my van. I do that too, but I felt like going into his place. Males don't appreciate the huge risk we take by going into their territory. I dodged a bullet anyway. He seemed to be a manosphere bro. Women trap men with pregnancy, cliche after cliche. Or he got a better offer. Good luck to him, and fuck him for his impoliteness of not making up an excuse. It's a smart man who keeps all offers of sex on the back burner. Guess he wasn't smart. It didn't matter because the older Italian brother had matched with me. If you do enough swiping left on that thing, eventually it only shows you males who've swiped right, even though they're not nearby. He worked out that he knew me from the food van interaction, and he was so keen that it was funny. Are you going to ride me like your motorcycle? You know it, young'un. I liked that he was about my height and skinny, a small motorcycle like mine. I'm going to have so much sex with you, I'm going to fuck you every day. ESL sexting was one of my favourite things. You never see a young skippy say stuff like that. It's their intention, but it's too much of an admittance of desire. So closed off. Unfortunately, there was a record scratch moment. I'm seeing someone, if that's okay with you. Damn, I thought I had a potentially dedicated sex slave for my use. I avoided doing that to another woman. I checked whether she knew, and he assured me she did. I could only take his word for it. Normally, in a more populated area with more choice, I wouldn't do this. But I was in an area of male drought and probably quite a few young, attractive backpacker women, so I went along with it. You better at least be good at it. I camped my last night at a free camp on the way out of town in a little settlement called Roebuck. There were people jumping in and out of a vehicle and slamming doors for quite a while, and I got really spooked that we were being raided. I lay awake, waiting for the inevitable, the Gorgetown machete at the ready. Goddess knows what I was going to do with it. That wasn't true, I'd planned it in my mind. Throw on my motorcycle helmet so they wouldn't be able to punch me, then leap out of the van waving the machete. They'd probably collapse laughing at the sight of me. At least they'd be incapacitated so I could run to the cabin and drive off. The trip back to Miriwong was pretty uneventful. Halls Creek was my overnight stop again. It's amazing how you can cover 1,000 kilometres so much easier out here. It's over 1,000 k's to Brisbane from my hometown, but it's hard to do in 2 days. On the way, Philippa texted me and said she'd be back from Sydney early. The UK trip hadn't panned out, so I only had a week of relief from her left, not a whole blissful month. I figured she texted me so I'd come back from Broome. I suspected that she thought I'd stay in Broome for longer since she wasn't there. I wasn't silly enough to rip her off like that. I valued my life too much. As soon as I was back, I set about auditioning the Italian. He was typical in the overly keen on-screen, quiet-in-person kind of way. I was initially pretty disappointed as I didn't feel like a high-maintenance lover, particularly one who was a two-timing slut. At least he was useful for finding a hidden place where we could park up. It was an empty block of land with tall grass all around and a rocky outcrop hiding us from the road. He said that they used to do Buschdorfs here at the end of the dry season with all the travellers. That'd be fun. More fun than what I expected this to be. Luckily, I was proved wrong. We got in the back and he went in for the kiss. Even though his smoky saliva slid from his mouth into mine as he hungrily ate my lips and mouth, I could taste that he also needed a real feed. It was still good, and for once I wasn't worried about my own nocturnal reflux breath. It's easier when they have it also. And to my absolute joy, he went down on me. For ages. I was annoyed that so many young males didn't do this anymore. Maybe they did it on women who they really wanted to impress. I was under no illusion that they wanted to impress me. They just wanted to practice on me. I'm sure they thought they were getting the best out of me, but it was the reverse. For when their chosen wifey reached her 50s, she would be envying women who were cougaring it up. This is something that men don't understand. They think they're going to be the happy cheaters for the whole of their married lives. Some of them would, sure, a great reason to not have relationships with them. But it was women who looked way better in their 40s and 50s than men did. And it was women who could easily score sex with 8, 9, or 10 level of attractiveness. even if they weren't quite at that level because of age. We didn't fuck them because they admired us, we fucked them because they were available. Men in their 50s could only wish they could fuck nines and do lines. As the saying goes, men fuck who they can, women fuck who they want. Anyway, this one was what is known as a half-decent shag. He wasn't the best and he wasn't the worst. He bounced back for seconds, was still affectionate afterwards, gave great head and knew how to smoothly move his tiny little hips. My only complaint was that he had a dull personality. There was something about the way he communicated though. I wondered if he couldn't help this, like he'd gone through something and was a bit broken, and was very reliant on his family who probably scapegoated him. Anyway, it wasn't my problem, it was the other birds. I slightly wondered if she was older like me, because he seemed the type to like being mothered. In the words of Meg Thee Stallion, I'm a player, not a saviour. And he was typical Euro boy in that he was all talk. Speaking of playing, he wanted to go for round 3 after he finished his Coles shelf packing job at 11 p.m. I didn't see why not. He texted me later and said that he couldn't come, it was too late. The way he phrased it was like I was the one who was insisting he come over after his shift. Sneaky. Well, fuck that. I only need my one kind of fuck, and it's not my head. I texted him back. Thanks very much for the Savo. That was all I needed. All the best. I didn't feel like being available. Truth is, this guy had a hard act to follow. My last port in a storm, not the Soldier, was in Brownsville while I was working the truck driving job. It was hard to get physical with Mo because I was so damn tired all the time, but I never missed an opportunity. Plus, I let him do most of the work. I first saw him after hooking up on Tinder, finding that he could actually hold a conversation and getting myself a room in a backpackers in Brownsville for the night. This was pre-season, so I had a lot more energy for our first encounter. A nice enough looking young fella, he later told me that his parents were from Sierra Leone. He'd come out as a child, so had that Aussie vibe from going to school here, but he was definitely different from other 19-year-olds that you'd find in Brownsville. I know, that's very young, but it's legal, and I didn't find him, he found me. The first night was cute as he explained his sex problems. Sheesh, they all have sex problems. At least he wasn't trying to blame it on me, which has happened in the past with males my age. He said he liked when the woman was on top, but he found it really hard to come, and she usually got tired. We said about the business, and I too got tired. All those durries I smoked. So he got in the driver's seat. Next minute he seemed to be arriving, and he certainly loudly let everyone know. I love when males are louder than me. Go for it, Mo. Afterwards he was so proud of himself. I've never come in that position. I could tell that he felt like all of his orgasm problems were now fixed. Seriously, I should charge for this. I wouldn't get the 8s, 9s and 10s though. We got into it again because he was pretty unstoppable. Then we chatted, and we even laughed. This was a pure miracle. None of these Tinder boys had personalities, or at least they didn't bother showing them to me, which made the whole thing a bit dry. I love this kid's innocence as he chatted away about how sex was not what he expected when he first had it. I hoped he hadn't been a virgin and wasn't telling me. I'd want to know, because I'd be proud too. There was an innocence about him that was gorgeous. He explained this during another of our sessions. His father had been in a gang in Sierra Leone and he'd been scared off all drugs and alcohol from him, so his only outlets were the gym and sex. And I was the winner from all of that. I didn't see him for a while, and when I contacted, he was a bit impatient. Why hadn't I contacted him before? It was nice to be wanted. And wanted by a young, hot male who'd grown a couple of sizes since I'd seen him. His hair had changed too. He now had little dreadlocks. He looked every bit a man, and I was more than impressed. It was well worth the hotel room fees to have this session with this young Adonis. I even brought him back to the shop I lived in Caneville once, and we pretty much spent the whole time getting down to it. But he did what most males off Tinder do. He didn't want to come down to the fish and chip shop with me. They don't like to be seen with cougars in case young women thought they had a girlfriend. This was ridiculous. If anything, it improved their market value. I couldn't care less, just as long as he kept being nice while we were together, and that he kept being hard. I think the success of Mo lay in the fact that he had a curved cock, not to the side but forward and pointing down like a banana, a larger than average banana too. Most black guys don't have the good cocks that they have the reputation of having. I've sampled quite a few with large cocks, but I think that they're more active on Tinder because they're proud of themselves. And the blood that goes into those things would certainly make them obsessed with sex. Mo himself said that he could never be faithful to one woman. He just wanted to have lots of sex and one woman wouldn't do. Oh, how grateful I was to be 52, not 22. This one would have been a heartbreaker. I decided to leave Mirraglen before Philippa came back. I couldn't face her and her bullshit. Because I was so proud of my bus, I was terrified that she'd find fault with it, and I'd king hit her. I'd have to take a running jump to reach her head. Quick kick to the knees would do the trick. I was meant to start on the outside of the bus. That job was above my pay grade, ridiculously physical and probably dangerous. I'd have to clamber all over the slope roof of the bus wielding a metal grinder, trying to get rid of all the flaking paint. I really didn't feel like it. And it really didn't feel like this place anymore either. I'd planned to drive back to Darwin and put the van on a transport truck back to Sydney. Driving with bad shocks and brakes through areas of no phone reception gave me the chills. I wasn't to know that I could have easily done it. If I'd made it to Darwin, maybe I would have been able to seek a second opinion or even get the shock sent. I wasn't thinking straight, and my quick decision was acted on even quicker. It was also helped by the fact that I'd been sporadically texting Billy every now and then. I was spun out by the Ringers, Western thing, and generally being in a wannabe cult situation. How typical of me to be worried about ending up in a cult, and I end up in a cult. Moaning face emoji. Billy had sent back, wide-eyed face emoji. Come back here. A wannabe cult leader is worse than an actual cult leader. She was wise, that Billy, and I was glad to have someone sensible to talk to. The young'uns were not. Even Marcel and Clement had kind of changed their tune, saying, "It's not that bad here." I didn't want to contemplate where the change of heart came from. All the same, I made sure I dropped in and said goodbye to them. I even teared up a little when I said goodbye to Clement. It wasn't because I'd missed them so terribly. It was that nothing had worked out how I'd wanted it. There was meant to be work, and I couldn't get the work I wanted. I felt like a failure, and the generalized fear that Mirraglen invoked was bound to come to a head eventually. It was so split second. Matt had asked me the night before to drop him at the airport. He was going to go back to Tassie and face the music. That night he got absolutely shickered, and I had to rush him to make his flight. He gave me a shit ton of his stuff, so that was worth it. I saw Sue chatting with him before we left. I laughed at this openly. Matt would have owed money and she sent Sue to do her dirty work. I was laughing at Sue for being such a stooge. While we were driving to the airport, Matt said that she was just saying goodbye and wishing him well. Oops. This place does that to you though, and I couldn't believe I was on Matt's side. With him no longer there, I'd be the only one who had the strength to fight off the cult vibes. Although I think Matt's attitude had changed, he would have done anything to stay there and not do jail. He was yakking on about how he was going to hide out in Tas somewhere at a mate's. He was trying to tell me about a mate in Darwin who'd help me out also. I actually lost it on him. Matt, there's no mates who can help me. I'm so fucking sick of these bum steers. I'm in Darwin to catch a truck out of here and I'm not looking back. Poor Matt, he didn't deserve that. He was messy as he tried to get all his luggage out of my van. I didn't give him a hand. Instead, I just drove off after he shut the van's side door, like a pissed-off girlfriend. And then I kept going east. I'd packed my van last night, got Pierre and Matt to help me put my motorcycle in the back. I had ridden it a fair bit, including to the massive, beautiful dam nearby. It hadn't been neglected. I had to admit to Pierre that I was going. He was cute and said that if he'd known earlier, he'd have gotten a lift to Darwin. I nearly said, "What about the cute French girl you've been hanging out with? I'm sure she wouldn't appreciate that." Without being the jealous kind, I'd made myself look jealous unwittingly. Yesterday I'd gone down to the Riverbank bush camp. This was the first time I'd been, and it was going to be the last. I made the decision while I was down there to bounce. As I got down to the jetty, I accidentally busted Pierre and the French girl putting their gear back on. Oh no, they'd probably been fucking. I sat under the large awning and waited for them to come up. They jumped on the quad and headed off. Again, oh no, they didn't even want to talk to me. I went and lay on the jetty and felt sorry for myself. I stayed the night at Timber Creek where I'd picked up Felix all that time ago. I felt like I'd been in Mirrawong for months, but it was only a matter of weeks. I never pay too much attention to time when I live like this, and I certainly packed a lot in a few weeks. I decided that I had to be proud of myself. What a story I had. As I was walking around the beautiful bottle tree-filled van park, I was organising lifts on trucks out of Darwin. I tried the biggest company and they were a bit of a nightmare. I planned to get my bike out of the back and ride it down the Stewart, cutting in through Broken Hill to Canberra. All my shit in the back of the van would have cost a whole lot more with this company. I had to take pics of it all, and while I was doing that, I tried another. Suddenly it got very urgent. A woman I spoke to in a Melbourne office sounded initially lackluster, asking about the size of the van, where I was. Next minute, "Oh, he's here. He's here." She was Greek and animated, and I loved her energy, so I didn't question what she told me next. "Can you get to Gorgetown and meet Ralph? He's heading there now." I said I couldn't today, but I'd make it by tomorrow. I shared her excitement and decided to go for it. She said it didn't matter what I had in the back of the van, so that was perfect for me. The big company could bite me. I had a truck to meet in Gorgetown. I spent the rest of the evening planning on what things I'd need on the bike. I was so tense and stressed while I did this, though it was a good stress. The big bike ride home would be perfect to get me past my feelings of failure. I'd really get a sense of achievement doing that. And because I was going to be passing out of the Tropic of Capricorn and into real winter weather in southern Northern Territory and northern South Australia, I had to really plan my wardrobe. I was not above living in the same jeans and jacket for a week. In fact, I looked forward to living like a grot. The decision was tent or no tent. I decided to save bucks because I just dropped $3,000 cash on this company. As I lay awake from being too energized, I hoped to all hell that I hadn't been scammed. Why didn't they have credit card facilities? Me and my spontaneous decisions. I'd even spoken to the truckie Ralph, and he'd said not to bother going down the middle. "I'll get you across the Barkly and you can take your bike off in Camberwell." Why the hell not? I convinced myself it was legit, then fell asleep.